This archive, basically the disclosure everyone's asking for.
I'm looking at it right now, and then it just keeps going and keeps going. Where do we even start?
And what we're trying to do with this archive is provide enough intelligence and information so that people can begin to attain discernment.
What are a couple ones that you can tell us about that is important that we look at?
One of the most astounding things in the archive is...
I'm speechless.
This is why I'm on your show, is to turn people to and say, everything you're asking for, short of us hauling a dead ET body in a spacecraft out of a deep underground military base, is in this archive. I've been working with a top secret group that are fed up with the secrecy, and they're on our side of disclosure, but it's getting blocked at other levels. Many of them are afraid of being prosecuted because they have been threatened. They want to create the psychological effect of fear of anything alien because their long-term agenda is to...
Oh my God. Are you ready to shine? Shine bright. Woohoo! Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wondered if UFOs are real and then when they'll make an appearance, then do we have the Disclosure Project show for you. Today, I'll be talking with Dr. Stephen Greer, creator of numerous brilliant documentaries, including The Lost Century, founder of the Disclosure Project, who has just released the most critical library and archive of documents, I would declare, in the world. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about what's just been released, where we're at disclosure, if there's a massive cover-up, when ETs might make themselves visible to all, and are we safe from any black flag events? So welcome back to the show, Stephen. Are you ready to shine?
Yeah, let's do it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Woohoo! And we're going to go through your site here today. I want to share the archive with people.
Sure.
And I've just gotten access to it about an hour and a half ago, and oh my God. So I'm speechless. But before I go fully speechless, before we dive right into things, it seemed like last year there was this head of momentum. Things, the corner had been rounded. Things were taking place. This was going to come to the forefront. Why does it seem like everything ET related has gone quiet again, Stephen?
Well, this is one of the reasons why we released the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive, the DPIA, which is what you're referring to. The Congress has had the bill that came out of the Senate right after our National Press Club event in June, where they included a amnesty or safe harbor period for major whistleblowers, where they would have 6 months of protection to come forward, and then they could be prosecuted. Those items were all gutted in the House reconciliation process, because in the United States, you have to have the Senate and the House agree on a big bill, which this was part of the National Defense Authorization Act, which basically funds the entire Department of Defense. So there are two men who are chairs of powerful committees in the House, Mike Turner of the Intelligence Committee and Mike Rogers of the Armed Services, who killed in part those provisions and some others. And the other thing that has happened, quite separate from that important legislation being gutted, was the fact that, and I've been working with people in the House on the House Oversight Committee for some time now, we were trying to get a select committee with subpoena power. And I just had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with members of that committee, members of Congress, and that looks like that is not going to be granted. It's being blocked because the select committee would get funding, staff to research this, subpoena power for top secret whistleblowers. So there's active blockages happening in the Congress. And so there are several other big initiatives, therefore, that I'm part of separate from what's going on with the U.S. government. And I had predicted this, by the way. I predicted that there would be people who would surface, and people say, well, are there people embedded in the U.S. Congress that would turn this effort sideways? I said, absolutely, there are, and we'll know them by their deeds. It's like it says, I think, in the Bible, you shall know them by their deeds. And so they have now declared themselves, and we know who they are. And that creates a huge liability for them that I don't think they're aware of. We'll get into that in a moment, in terms of colluding with a criminal operation and the legal risks of doing so, up to and including treason. So the other issue is what then is the solution to that? I mean, I've been dealing with this. Remember, I founded the Global Disclosure Project, but before that went public in 2001, I had been involved in briefing people like the CIA director for Bill Clinton and top generals and admirals at the Pentagon, and also members of Congress all the way back in the mid-90s who were on the Intelligence Committee of the Senate, et cetera. And this is what continues to happen. So I've had a 31-year history of seeing this. So that's why we have backup plans. And one of the big, huge backup plans is what you opened the show with, and that's this massive intelligence archive, which I will tell people, let me just cliff note this for folks, because we're limited time. If the Congress were to have hearings 5 days a week for an entire year, from 9 until 5 p.m., there would be less evidence presented and fewer whistleblowers than are named in this archive. Name, rank, serial number, their videos, the correspondence files, their bona fides, et cetera. That's all there. So basically, we sort of just went ahead and spent, we had to spend about $500,000 in the last year to put this together. And it's on the internet for free. I mean, you have to register so we don't have a bunch of bots destroying it, but it's a free site. And we're hoping we can keep it free if people will support it through making contributions. If not, we'll have to put a paywall up. But right now, it's free and open to everybody. A little warning about that. When I did one show that had maybe 400,000 people see it, it overwhelmed our system and people couldn't get in. And so just keep in mind the technology that would support a multi-terabyte database that has this amount of content in it with 100,000 people jumping on at the same time. You will get in a queue. Sometimes it can't handle all that all at once. That's the problem. So I'm just saying that as a caveat. But yeah, it's open to everyone. It's for free. You can provide the link here for where people go. And you'll be astonished at what's in there. For example, we have 115 named military and corporate whistleblowers on the UFO issue in there with their videos and information. There are another 650 that are masked. In other words, we haven't disclosed their names because they've asked us not to, who can be subpoenaed. And those, however, have a little summary of what they would testify to. And so all of that is in there.
Forgive me, I'm looking at it right now, and we're going to put it up here for people. I see list after list of people's names and what they saw, of people's names and what they saw before it gets blacked out. And then it just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. And I'm guessing that those are people that in the future may be willing to testify and put their names out there publicly. They just don't want it floating around right now.
Well, and they want it to be in an official sanctioned way because many of them are afraid of being prosecuted for either crimes they were involved in these illegal covert programs dealing with this subject, or because they have been threatened.
Another current technology was recently investigated by Dr. Greer and his engineering team at an undisclosed location in the Arizona desert.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 magnesium alloy specially configured plates. This thing's the size of a nice-sized shoebox. The circuitry you see on the right is a misdirect. This thing, for 3 years, had been sitting in this near a chicken coop in his backyard out in the desert, putting out 3 kilowatts of power continuously, and we cranked it up to 5 kilowatts. No input power. and is running off the magnetic flux of the space around it that he can tune to any place on the earth so it's correct, and boom. This thing, solid state, no moving parts. We just saw this. But he's a textbook case of making every wrong decision. Tried to patent it. Well, you'll see in a moment what happened. He ended up getting put in prison for a week. He has had sabotage, death threats, murder of people around him.
I spent 8 days in that jail. When I went before the court, the judge said, "Come here, Doug." He says, "Read this. You sign it, you go home. You don't sign it, you go to jail." And all it was is, I will not ever in my lifetime, ever, through me or anyone else, if anybody else is manufacturing these, I'll go to jail.
And here's the secrecy order he was slapped with. But look at the date. 1984. It's almost 40 years ago. So, doing the same thing, patent office, people think this is a myth. No, here's a secrecy order.
See, so I don't want to go through that again. I'm scared my family and everybody. So now what we're going to do, we're going to be very quiet. I'm going to build my 1 megawatt. It'll take 2.5 years to build it, because it's very complicated. I gotta acclimate it to the earth.
Now, here's another huge announcement. I couldn't have said this about a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, but we have, and I can't say what agency, but I've been working with a top secret group, separate from anyone in the Congress or White House, that are fed up with the secrecy, and they're on our side of disclosure. And they operate under a SAP, a Special Access Project, which is a compartmented top secret, special compartmented information, TSSCI operation. And they, effective June 20th, we will have in place security and protection for whistleblowers. So the reason that's important, people need to put that out there. I've been asking for this for 31 years, and we've never gotten it. Now there's a group of people who are truly heroic, who have said, no, we're going to put this in place. And people who want to come forward, we will be able to provide protection, security. And this is important. For example, let me give you one example, bring this down to earth. There's a former chairman of a Fortune 50 company, one of the biggest corporations in the world, who is wanting to defect. Now, as soon as he reached out to me, he had an associate who told him, they will kill you, your children, and all of your grandchildren if you speak about this, because he was so high up and he possesses documents. I mean, literally schematics of energy systems and man-made UFOs and things like this that would liberate the planet. In fact, he said, for decades, we could have had, quote unquote, free energy for the entire earth. So now that this guy is pushing 80, he, is going to go see his maker at some point, like we all will. And he really regrets, and that's the word used, his role in this. He wants to come forward, but he's got to get protected. And so the Congress did not provide provisions for that. So now, because at least if it's an American, I can't speak for Great Britain and other countries. We don't have this set up for those other countries where we do have whistleblowers, or Canada, but in the United States, where most of them are, we can, effective June 20th, provide those OPSECs, Operation Security, and we will. So that's a huge breakthrough that's been a long time coming.
Beautiful. Thank you. I want to dive into your archive. Before I do that, you had mentioned something. I just want to touch on it real briefly, because I want to spend most of the time talking about the archive and getting people a glimpse of this, because this is so incredibly important. You mentioned the term collusion. I think you have mentioned, or at least inferred or implied, a cover up. You mentioned names of people who are doing this, and you mentioned how highly illegal this is. What's going on?
Well, we can unpack that for a moment. Now, this is common sense that if you're the president of the United States or the CIA director or the chairs of the Intelligence Committee of the Senate, who are supposed to be read in even to the legal black budget, the super secret black budget, and you make an inquiry into this and you're denied access or you are threatened, literally threatened, and I can prove this has happened. Those projects
presidents have been threatened.
Oh, absolutely. Ones I've dealt with. So the point I'm making is, if that's the situation, which it is, then the organization running these covert programs are, by definition, unconstitutional and illegal and are big criminal enterprise. So they need to be treated like a criminal enterprise because that's what they are. Now, they can't. Now, this is the other reason why we can disclose what we just did on the internet. Some of the documents you'll see in there are top secret and secret documents that have not been declassified. Now, why wouldn't I be arrested like the former president who's been arrested for this? Because these projects underlying those documents and about which they speak are themselves criminal enterprises. So they cannot use the law. You can't be a mafia don and then cite the law to protect your mafia operation, right? Let me make this simple for folks. So that's been our legal and constitutional theory since the mid-1990s. Once I learned personally that the director of the CIA and president and people like the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency and the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff and senior members and chairmen of committees in the House and Senate were being denied access to and or threatened, then we concluded that these programs are illegal and they cannot use the National Security Act to protect them. Now, this is true of Canada, by the way, also, and Great Britain and other countries. That this is the same dynamic in all of those countries.
If you're talking to the chiefs of staff, you're talking at the highest of high levels officially in the government. It begets the question,
if I had trolled this off the internet, I would have said, well, this is nonsense. These are meetings that I have been part of. In fact, not only part of, these are meetings at which I have been the stand-up briefer, the person conducting the briefing. And to hear, someone like a 3-star general who is the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is the largest military intelligence entity in the planet, telling me directly that under inquiry, he was denied access and brushed aside. Now, this is when things have gone off the rail. And for that reason, this does create a lot of fear, though. I mean, members of Congress know this is dangerous and that, there's nobody without sin. So, I mean, a lot of these members of Congress know that this group could have dirt on them or what have you, or withhold campaign donations from large aerospace companies. And so they will do their bidding. But we do have a few members of Congress who are taking the charge and are trying to get this through. But it's getting blocked at other levels. And so this is why we need an alternative strategy. This archive is basically the disclosure everyone's asking for. This is why I'm on your show, is to turn people to and say, everything you're asking for, short of us hauling a dead ET body in a spacecraft out of a deep underground military base,
although you have the photos.
We have the photos, we have the witnesses, we have the documents. So we have that. And this is 34 years of, well over $20 million I've expended to put all this together over 3 decades. So it's there for the public. It's a gift to humanity. Enjoy it. It will take you probably 2 years to get through it. And by the way, it is a work in progress because we did this very quickly because of the urgency of the issue. And it needs to be further refined. We need more. We're going to try to look for a full-time archivist, digital archivist, to go in and help further organize it and elaborate it. So there's a lot of work to be done over the next year or two.
I want to dive into it, and it's beautiful and it's brilliant. And I've heard that you're also going to have organization by priority. Where do we begin and things? And you said that it'll take about another year. I look forward to that. But I want to back up one question. Then we're going to dive in here and we're going to show screenshots and help walk people through some of this. If a 3-star general is being denied, if these people are being denied, who the hell is in charge?
There's a group that has gone under various names. I have a document from the early 1990s that calls them the Majority Joint Intelligence Committee, although it's just under an acronym of MAGIC or MAGI, M-A-J-I or M-A-J-I-C. And it's a global operation, actually. And there are people over the years that I've known who've been involved, like Admiral Bobby Ray Inman and former Vice President Dick Cheney and others. And there are international folks on it. It's very heavily weighted in the private sector, in financial and technology sectors, because, one of the first things I tell people, when I'm I remember when I was first asked to come in for the Senate Intelligence Committee folks 2 or 3 years ago and went into a SCIF, which a secure compartmented information facility. It's where top secret information is exchanged. And I basically said, up above you there is a map of the world. Erase all the geopolitical boundaries. The organization we're dealing with doesn't recognize Canada, U.S., Soviet, Russia, Great Britain. It's the whole world is their operating theater. And they don't regard the laws of any nation or international laws as something they need to obey. So they view themselves, quite frankly, above and beyond conventional society and law. It's a very powerful group. Now, the other issue is, why would it have such power? Well, it's sitting on technologies that are thousands of years from the future that would immediately get us off of oil and gas and coal and the petrodollar and, fossil fuels and surface roads and public utilities. And we're talking more than $1,000 trillion in assets would go the way of horse and buggies, right? So that is the problem. It's a massive macroeconomic issue. And the Minister of Defense of Canada that I met with, Paul Hellyer, he was a macroeconomics guy. And when I described what the secrecy was really about, he lit up. He says, when he was Ministry of Defense head in Canada, he says he never understood why he was denied this information. I said, yeah, because anybody who cares about humanity and the earth and the future of humanity would want these technologies used for peaceful purposes, then we'd have a whole new civilization. And that should have happened 100 years ago. That's why we call our new documentary The Lost Century. It's a whole century of lost technology and evolution. So that is one of the key issues here is the hardest thing to understand is the why. Why has this happened? Why was it assigned such secrecy? Why did a group in the 1950s seize power away from President Eisenhower and turn this into an illegal black project? Well, and
he was warning us. He was warning us at the time.
Oh, he did. I mean, it was his last speech to the world when he left office that day in 1961. He said, beware the military-industrial complex because it will be a threat to our democracy and way of life. And the reason he said that, which he didn't put into the speech, but we know now from people who worked with him, whose testimony is in this archive. They're since passed away, but they were early Disclosure Project witnesses and sources, was that he was in favor of moving forward with peaceful contact with the ETs and disclosing at least the technologies that would benefit humanity safely. Not necessarily the things that fly, because those can be a missile system, but the things that would run your house or your car or whatever without pollution and by the way, free, no energy bills, right?
0-point energy, or what Nikola Tesla called radiant energy, is the most profound and transformative gift that the quantum world offers us. The seemingly empty vacuum of space is actually a roiling sea of virtual particles fluctuating in and out of existence, and all those fluctuations require energy. If we could tap into this energy source, we would unlock a virtually unlimited reservoir of clean, free energy. Extraterrestrial spacecraft are known to harness 0-point energy.
U.S. scientists is understanding what this was. It was an energy device that used 0-point energy. That's what they referred it to as 0-point energy. And it was connected in such a manner that this device could power I mean, from a very small flashlight or a very small watch up to a city. And power was determined by what the demand on it was.
The implications of free energy go far beyond bringing monthly electric bills to zero or running a car without gasoline. Most of the cost of making anything, from growing food to building a skyscraper, is the energy of pulling raw materials out of the ground, shipping, processing, shipping again, and so on. If the cost of energy goes to zero, the cost of agriculture and manufacturing becomes negligible. Other critical solutions, like water desalination to end drought or air purification, both of which are prohibitively expensive due to energy costs, would suddenly become viable in a free energy paradigm. A new world where humans live in perfect harmony with nature is possible within our lifetimes. But this would mean the end of oil, gas, and coal, as well as the centralized power grid and the global macroeconomic system, which will stop at nothing to protect the hundreds of trillions of dollars at stake.
So that was something, he was a fundamentally good man. And Eisenhower was a 5-star general. When he made that speech, it's not like it was Abby Hoffman or some, radical hippie who was opposed to the military. He was a World War II hero and a 5-star general. But most people don't know the history of why he became so depressed and so despondent towards the end of his administration. It's because between 1956 and 1960, a group of folks decided to seize control over these projects and decapitate the presidency and other people who wouldn't go along with their agenda. And that's still the case. I mean, 60 years on, it's exactly the same as it was in the late 50s, early 60s.
Except there's probably more money and more technology floating about. But let's
way
go.
More, way more. Yeah.
Let's go. I'm going to show people a beginning screen of getting into the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive. It's a mouthful. All right. So we are in here and we have categories: Disclosure Project, UFO witnesses and whistleblowers, UFO related secret facilities, major historical UFO case. And this is, we can get access to all this: UFO crash retrievals, UFO science and technology, government documents, briefings, illegal government UFO false flag. We got to go there. UFO videos, photos. Where do we, media corruption and more, black budget, close encounters of the fifth kind. Where do we even start in this?
Well, I would say it depends what people's interests are. I think for people, just to get an overview, would want to go through all the military whistleblowers and witnesses, and some are corporate, but also take a look at the facilities map. Those black sites, we now have 155 identified sites where this issue has been handled, and some are more important than others. And in that section, there will be also documentation for it. One of the things we need to do is begin to create hot links between one section and another. Now, you can imagine this is going to be thousands of hours of tedious work for people. But right now, it's kind of raw information in categories, just to be honest. But that's really important, because if you look at that map of the world and you look at the list, it will actually list the names of the facilities. And by the way, for special forces guys or for members of Congress who have a need to know, I have provided the background files that are what we call the unredacted archive. What you're looking at is the redacted archive, where certain sources and methods have been redacted to protect innocent people who don't want to have their names out. But to legitimate folks who would have a need to know, who could actually roll on these illegal sites, they're being given everything. I'm giving them all the granular detail. And we have people who have been in these sites where they can say, here's where the gate is. Here's where the underground entry point is, right?
What can you tell us about a few of these sites?
Well, I can tell you about, yes. You look at Dugway, Utah, the Dugway Proving Grounds. So, we have a man there who was brought to an entrance that went underground to a massive complex that was something on the order of 1,300 square miles underground that extended out, like 30 some by 40 miles underground, and that had been formed. And that site is a much more critical site even than, say, Area 51 or Edwards Complex. They're all critical, but there's a rank order of the most important sites, and we know which ones they are. So by having these intelligence sources, now remember, I have debriefed over the years over 1,000 whistleblowers, well over 1,000. Not all of their information is in there, because some of them were deep throats who came to me and handed off material. So I've sort of been the pass-through or the doorway for these guys to come forward, and then I provide it to the public to the extent I can, or to people in the government. But so that Dugway facility, for example, I have a member of my team who is a senior, the most senior scientist at the Naval Research Labs, who was out there on an operation at Dugway Proving Grounds, and they were out there late at night with night scopes, and out of the ground comes this massive triangular silent craft. And it was one built by Northrop Grumman or Raytheon, man-made, totally free energy and totally anti-gravity, quote unquote. And we know that that's what's going on out there. There are both extraterrestrial vehicles they're studying and man-made ones that can be deployed from there. And it's a very large research and development area. Now, 52% of that range is owned and run by private corporate contractors, and only 48% by government. And the reason it's structured that way is that if someone does a FOIA request, they're not going to get anything. It's all sitting in the corporate world. So people don't realize it's the tail is wagging the dog here. The big corporate interests have done this shell game and smoke and mirrors to be able to hide what's going on, so that even senior people in government don't know what it is. And the corporations can claim proprietary privilege.
Now, you have a corporation section here. What are some of the top companies that are involved in this?
Yeah, now, there's a whole section in there, and a lot of it was based on what I call the Cox memo. Back in the 90s, there was a Congressman, Christopher Cox from Orange County. I briefed in his offices in Orange County, actually. And he said, well, where are these places? So I started putting together a list, and also a list of the corporations. And we came across the ones, like for the ones that are building underground covert facilities and deep underground bases and tunnels between those bases, crisscrossing out west all over, Bechtel Corporation and HIT Construction. Then I found that there were which aerospace companies had what facilities where. So we learned that Northrop Grumman, ironically, my uncle, who worked on the lunar module, had his whole career with Northrop Grumman, and also Lockheed Skunk Works, a division of Boeing. And also there are divisions of Ford and General Motors that have worked on these programs, General Electric, Raytheon, huge one, EG&G. There's a whole list. You'll see the names of the corporations and where some of the key facilities are, where the R&D is going on, including out in the desert of California, Nevada, Utah, and elsewhere. So we know where all these are. And we have sources and methods to pinpoint those. In fact, I'll say something here that's rather shocking. In September of 2023, last September, I was put on a helicopter by a man who is currently senior operational in these covert programs dealing with UFOs, and flown over 2 of these black sites. And we hovered over one where the Lockheed Skunk Works man-made UFOs come up out of the ground.
You've got that photo in there. I've seen the photo.
But I have more extensive video from the chopper that I have not released yet, because it has some sensitive information in it. Now, people go, how the hell did you get there? Now, if you look at the the environment right around this facility, there are these gigantic things that look like antennas. They're not. They're electromagnetic pulse weapons that are used to create electromagnetic and scalar pulses to test the man-made UFOs, but also just that one site I was over at the Lockheed Skunk Works facility, way out in the desert, way out there near Edwards Air Force Base. At least one or two extraterrestrial vehicles are targeted with that weapon and knocked down every year. So if you look at our crash retrieval section, you'll see there's something like 130 plus crash retrieval cases, but that's probably less than 10% of the ones that have happened, where we have targeted them with these advanced directional energy weapons, or DEWs, and using very high-tech, faster than the speed of light technology. A scalar weapon is faster than a normal light wave or electromagnetic signal, and they don't hit them every day, but this one place I was over is one or two killed ET craft a year. Something scarier is that the director who took me there said, and we're in the chopper, he says, and tears came to his eyes, because he says, when we put up a temporary flight restriction over this area, if a civilian aircraft flies in there, like a private jet or plane, we hit it, and that plane and those people vanish, and no one ever knows what happened to them. It's a missing plane, missing person account. And even sometimes when people are outside the temporary flight restriction area, the beam of this weapon will go out too far and hit an aircraft. And he has personally retrieved them. He has personally retrieved the bodies of the ETs and craft and these innocent civilians who have been killed. Now, this is a scandalous situation. We're talking murder going on now, right now. And these are the things we're trying to resolve. I mean, it's a big problem. And those kind of facilities, by the way, exist all over the world. Australia, down under,
It
Europe.
makes me think of a very big airplane that disappeared a few years back.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, who knows? I mean, I know what the technologies are, and I know what they're capable of. And I also know that sometimes these covert programs are trying to hit and retrieve an extraterrestrial vehicle to study it, and they will inadvertently hit a civilian aircraft. And of course, that gets covered up or whatever. Or in the case of this one site, there's no trace. We're talking incineration of both the human bodies and the human aircraft to powder. There's nothing there. And so, unfortunately, there are people who are wondering what happened to their family members flying on a private plane out in certain areas that have vanished, that have never been found. Well, now we know where they are, or they're nowhere, but we know what happened.
Do we have, you have a section here on extraterrestrials. Can you share with us about what photographs you have here about some of the beings that are documented in here?
Yes, well, there are several types. Now, in many of the crash retrieval witnesses, you're not allowed to take photographs and things out of a skiff. I mean, literally, you can't take a piece of paper. You go in with nothing, you come out with nothing, and you're searched. But occasionally, when they do come, they will give us information, and then we've had professional artists draw what the ETs look like. So we have hundreds of those, dozens. On top of it, a few years ago, maybe two, no, it must have been about 3 years ago now, a woman surfaced whose grandmother had worked on the atomic bomb and was then moved to Roswell when that event happened. And the grandmother passed away, and they were going through some old books in her attic, and out falls a photograph. But it's from the 1920s, not 40s, of an extraterrestrial being dissected on a slab with some doctors, and looks like some intelligence or government people in the back of the room. That was one of the photos I put in the Trump and Pence briefing document. But now it's in the archive, and you can see it. Now it has some damage to it. What we think it was a photograph that a friend of this woman took when they brought in an archive to do comparative analysis of the bodies from a prior incident all the way back to the 20s. We've had the top medical historian in the world in New York prove that the equipment, the gloves, everything was from between 1922 and 29. But so we're talking 20 years before Roswell. And so what I tell people is that there have been retrievals and involvement with this for at least 100 years. And that's why that it's an actual photograph, is so very interesting.
You share some other beings in there. What is an Atacama being?
That's the being that back some years ago came to our attention that had been taken out of the Atacama Desert in Chile. And it got covered up by some charlatans at Stanford and UCSF. Dr. Gary Nolan, who I'd entrusted with the genetics, ended up altering the genetics to show that it was a deformed fetus, but we know it isn't. And it was a child, still had growth plates in the bones, and the equivalent of a 6-year-old child, but it was only about 5 or 6 inches big. So it was some kind of, we don't know. I mean, we don't have a database of extraterrestrial genetics, but we do know that this is something quite extraordinary. And one of the problems is when you bring someone in to do these kind of tests, how easy is it for them to get corrupted? We found out that a $3.5 million or so grant from the Pentagon landed at this scientist's place as soon as he got our DNA sample from this Atacama humanoid. So if you look at the documentary Sirius, we can provide a link to, you'll see a whole research about that. And the top genetic malformation for bone malformation expert in the world at Stanford, Dr. Lockman, said point blank, there are no genetic defects like this. It most certainly isn't an aborted fetus, which is what the cover-up artist said. And then that's what was reported in the New York Times and Boston Globe and elsewhere. So what you find is that even when you get hard evidence, it can be intercepted and then twisted, and then the mainstream media and these big academic institutions will then pervert it into something completely false. So that's a huge problem. It's like, I've learned the hard way just exactly who can you trust if someone's going to be blackmailed or bribed or threatened. And that is what happened to the research on the Atacama humanoid. Now, I can't say it's extraterrestrial. We don't know what it is. I've always said it certainly isn't human. It's a humanoid type creature. But what it is, we don't know because the genetics studies on it were corrupted.
Who is Gary Nolan? What did he find?
He's the guy who covered it up and actually did the genetic research. He's the guy. Yeah. And now he's become a UFO guy and a sort of UFO celebrity. But look, I've been doing this for 34 years. That story, you can repeat it over 1,000 times, 2,000 times. And I'm always shocked if somebody doesn't end up betraying the truth once they either get threatened or bribed. But at any rate, this is unfortunately the situation with humans, is that it's all about integrity and courage, which is in very short supply on planet Earth.
Thank you. So let's go to major historical UFO case files, and you've got brave pilots and traffic controllers who've come forward. You've got the Cat Syndrome case. You've got civilian cases, law enforcement cases, mass witness sightings, and on it goes. What are a couple ones that you can tell us about that is important that we look at?
Well, some of these people know generally, but they don't know the details and the background. For example, we had someone who disclosed, a whistleblower who did provide information on the big Japan Airlines case that happened in the 80s, where this thing that was flying from Paris to Tokyo, 747 Japan Airlines, and the captain, the flight crew saw this massive, and you see the illustration in there of this object, and the pilot drew it, and then we had it professionally recreated. and we have the pilot's account, and we have also the documents of the radar tracking of it from military radar, but then we have the civilian radar material and a top secret whistleblower from the FAA, John Callahan. And John Callahan actually took, when he retired, the CIA tried to confiscate it, but John Callahan took the original radar tracks and all the digital data of that and gave it to us. And that's in the archive. The original is in the archive. And so when people say, where's the hard evidence? I said, go to this archive. I'm telling you, it's more than the US Congress and the president will ever see. It is. I mean, I swear it is. So now that case, what do you have? You have professional pilots, military pilots, government documents, the original FAA tape, and everything about it. And so when people say, well, are there any cases that absolutely solidly prove what these objects are and how they operate? I said, oh, absolutely. Because this object would appear, at one point in the sky and teleport instantly, 150 miles away on the other side of the aircraft, zipping around like this. And it was massive. It was the size of a aircraft carrier, but it looked like a walnut. It almost looked like a walnut, and huge. And so, that was in the 1980s. But we ended up, that case did get known in the public some, but then the big breakthrough was having this whistleblower from the FAA. He was the director of accidents and investigations for the entire FAA in the United States. And he came forward, and then with him, he brought the original radar tapes and gave them to us. So this is the kind of material in the archive. We have digitized and spent a lot of time getting all this material in this archive so the general public or members of the Canadian government or the US government or whoever can look at it and finally see the evidence. Because most people are saying, where's the evidence? Well, it's sitting in there. The archive has all of it. Yeah.
I've read several news stories recently about they may be ours, they may not be ours, but craft with technology that yes, or both, coming out of the water lately. And you have a section here, unidentified submerged object cases, which may not be quite the same thing. But what do you think is going on in the water?
Well, again, let's back this up for a moment. And this is what I do with every member of Congress and they're all new to this, right? They're not experts. In fact, they don't know anything. Anybody who's seen our documentary Unacknowledged knows more than the chairman of the Intelligence Committee of the U.S. Senate, honestly. So that is a fact, unfortunately. So what you find is that people are mixing together multiple phenomena, plural, as one thing. All right.
I guess guilty is charged.
Okay. And there are three major categories being thrown together. There is the extra-terrestrial, which means civilizations from another planet around another star system, right? Who have been able to bend space-time and travel through space and have visited the Earth. That's one category. The second, which is bigger for cases, are man-made UFOs or UAPs that are built by Northrop and Grumman, Lockheed Skunk Works, Raytheon, and other contractors based on studying the physics and the science of these objects that are both early experiments by humans, but the reverse engineering of the extraterrestrial. Those came together in the 40s and 50s, and voila, by 1954, October 1954, we have a source who was in the Naval Research Labs, who was in the vault and saw the document stating that was the date we mastered, quote unquote, gravity control. We can control for gravity waves and lift. So 1954 to now is 70 years, right?
You also have a section of gravity control in there. You have a lot of documents on gravity control.
We have a huge section on the science of this, massive section, and it's growing. So what I tell people is that when you see these objects, you have to ask, is that ET or is it man-made masquerading in a deceptive way as ET. And then there's a third category, which is more complex. And this gets into strange phenomenon that people call extraterrestrial, but it's actually extra dimensional. It's entities and things from another dimension, but not from another star system. And because anything going faster than the speed of light that's extraterrestrial has certain qualities of an extra dimensional or interdimensional being, they get mixed up. So, but I always point out, one of my favorite quotes when I was at the Vatican with Monsignor Balducci, who was a senior theologian to Pope John Paul. And he says, yeah, well, neither demons nor angels need flying saucers. And he was saying that in a very simple way, is to say, there are all kinds of people deliberately, now this is deliberate, conflating all kinds of phenomena, plural, with it being extraterrestrial or alien, when it isn't. And so, you know, as a doctor and a scientist, I look at this lack of discernment as dangerous, because it'd be like, if you're making a policy decision on this, or you're someone in the public listening to your show and you're trying to make sense of all this, if somebody is out there deliberately mislabeling and miscalling, identifying things, that's what's happening, then people are going to be hopelessly lost in this obfuscation and confusion. So what I tell people, we have to bring clarity and discernment. So you have to understand there are three major categories of observable phenomena that are quite separate, but there's overlaps. Because if you have reverse engineered an extraterrestrial vehicle and you keep refining that reverse engineering from the 40s to now, 70, 80 years, you're going to get something that looks very close to a real ET craft, right? So you could trick people. But also, if you understand these other dimensions, you can create electromagnetic technologies to create false extra-dimensional phenomena like the Skinwalker Ranch is now.
Okay, what is that?
Oh, I know what that is. I know the people who set that up. We'll get into that if you want. But
yes,
I'm trying to make a central point here is that is that you can, if you're one of these people behind the curtain, like the Wizard of Oz, doing all these deceptions to confuse the public, it's easy to do because the public doesn't have the information to discern 1 from 2 from 3, or 4, 5, and 6 for that matter. So I think this is where not everything that goes bump in the night is an extraterrestrial or an alien. But if people run off half-cocked and jump to conclusions without doing their homework, and what we're trying to do with this archive is provide enough intelligence and information so that people can begin to attain discernment. Because otherwise, we're going to be manipulated. You see, in the vacuum of confusion and ignorance, these maestros of deception can then manipulate the public or the Congress. So that gets into this whole other category. There's a whole category in there about staged alien abductions and a covert program staging events. Now, all the way back to Betty and Barney Hill. Everybody thinks that was way before we could have hoaxed anything like that. They are wrong. By the late 1950s and early 60s, covert programs had the ability to absolutely stage an alien abduction and did so. And I think one of the problems is people say, well, why would they do that? It's because they want to create the psychological effect of fear of anything alien, because their long-term agenda is to have a sort of military unified world that's militaristic, poised against the ETs. And since the ETs obviously aren't hostile, or they would have shut us down by now, they have to create a false flag of operations. And people say, when is that going to happen? I said, well, it started happening in the 1950s. And that's where you get into a deep dive into another section, the government documents, where we have all these thousands of pages of government documents. And one of my favorite is a 1953 document signed by the director of the CIA at the time, Walter Bedell Smith. And CIA Director Smith in this states that the psychological warfare value of the UFO issue should be exploited. Fast forward to the mid 80s, and Dr. Jacques Vallée got a document from the CIA that was talking about how they were staging abductions of peasants in Argentina and Brazil, their word, for its psychological warfare value, using our own assets, making them look alien. Now, this is a black and white document, a CIA document. Now, we don't have it. Jacques Vallée hasn't wanted to release it. I think he's been threatened. But it's been acknowledged to exist by 3 other people. So that sort of evidence is very important. We also have an Air Force intelligence officer on the record in the archive stating, in fact, that they have staged these abductions and have been doing so for decades and are still doing so. So one of the problems is that when you have enough technology and what's called stagecraft, you can stage things, right? And people who don't know that there are covert programs with this capability are going to jump to the false conclusion. This is the purpose of a false flag, is people to reach a false conclusion that there are aliens doing this from another star system, when in fact it's a covert group of humans using stagecraft and very high-tech systems.
Do you feel, because I can hear people asking it in the background, do you feel we're coming to the point where enough information may come forward to where a bigger black flag event may be staged? And I don't want to bring anybody to a place of fear, but if there is almost this one world order with all this technology, what could they do?
Oh, they can do anything. Look, in 1997, one of the things we've put in there is the 1997 briefings for Congress I held. Now, we're talking 27 years ago in November. And, you know, we had the chairman of the House Oversight Committee there, Dan Burton, and other people. One of the people who was there, who got basically, I wouldn't use the word abducted, he was taken from the hotel the night before the event because he was going to testify to the existence of an interagency committee running in the black world illegally that had the means, and this was in 1974, where they had the means to hit a button and these objects would appear and could attack U.S. installations or global facilities looking like an alien attack. So that was 50 years ago now that we had, and he was on that interagency committee. He was going to tell these members of Congress that, but people he worked with came to his hotel and took him out to a secure location out in Virginia and kept him from speaking. And that was in November 1997. So I think that if that capability, and he said when he was read into or briefed and involved with that, that system had been in place for a number of years, at least since the 60s. So we're probably 60 years into an era where that capability has existed and it keeps getting better. I think one of the problems has been for that organization, this cabal of criminals, is that the Disclosure Project keeps putting it out there to senior members of the military and CIA who are not part of this conspiracy, as well as to members of the Congress and White House staff, that this is possible and don't be fooled again. Don't be tricked. Now, the most difficult nut to crack, unfortunately, is the UFO subculture, because I'd say 90% of what people consume on this subject is like a pre-placed weapon of mass destruction. It's a disinformation packet that's been embedded in the UFO subculture for its psychological warfare value. That's true of 90% of what's presented at UFO conferences, books, documentaries, movies. It's all been scripted. Now, I'm not saying that everyone who's purveying that information or disinformation knows that. I think they're just, frankly, gullible. But I think that's a real problem, because most people, when they Google this subject, are going to get 1 part information, 9 parts disinformation, which is another reason why we release this explosive archive, is that this is the real stuff here. This is the real X-Files, not the fake ones. And so it's a public record now, and it's attributed with witnesses and sources and documents and official government documents. So I think that's why we wanted to do it, is that it takes it out. I always have said, for 30 years, I've said, look, don't take my word for this. Here's the evidence. I mean, this is what a doctor does. I mean, it's like, you have to reach in it. Now, the part of the archive we're still doing, and this will be a whole new category, very important for everyone to hear this, will be the section called the comprehensive assessments. So in other words, there's going to be, and if you want to hear the background of this, it's kind of interesting. Back in August, there were a group of special forces guys that I'm mentoring and giving information to, who met at our retreat center. And I did, right before that, to prepare that meeting and get them briefing materials, a whole week of presentations to a closed group of people that had all these assessments in it, that connected all these dots. And then in March, we did another whole week that some of you may have seen. It was live streamed on the internet for people who want to see it. And those are being transcribed and redacted. Some of them have to be redacted, that I presented for the Special Forces group, mostly Green Beret and guys. But the most of that will be organized so that, for example, one whole section about are these facilities and connecting all the dots between the facilities, because information and data isn't knowledge, and knowledge isn't wisdom. So someone has to make an assessment out of this vast amount of information. So that's what we're attempting to do. And that is not in there right now, but it will be, we hope, in the next few months. And that will really light up all the connectivity and connect all the dots for people.
Thank you. So you talked earlier about this one facility where when they put up their weapon, anything that goes into it, and they get several ET craft a year. In your best assessment, how often are ET craft visiting us, and why are they visiting us?
Oh, I think there's almost a continuance surveillance and visit, because we're considered a threat to ourselves and a threat to the order of the universe. Remember, when we detonated the first atomic bomb, that's when the whole modern era of UFOs started. Why? Because everyone knows what an electromagnetic pulse is that goes out from an atomic blast. What people don't know, but Tesla did, is the scalar component of that. That doesn't go out in a wave like a normal electromagnetic signal. It's a point, longitudinal point. It goes out at multiples of the speed of light. That tears the fabric of the universe if it's a violent, big burst, and it disrupts interstellar communication and travel. So that's why the ETs appeared en masse as we developed atomic and nuclear weapons, and still do. Now, let's add to that threat. We're viewed as a primitive, potentially enlightening species with a lot of problems, right? Right now, we're in a lot of problems. And we're not yet civilized. A level 1 civilization, and Michikaku talks about this, would be not destroying its environment and living together globally peacefully. Well, we're not there. And so we're a level 0 civilization. These civilizations are level 3, 5, 10. They're way out there, both socially, spiritually, and technologically. So until we get to be a level 1 civilization that's peaceful, our possessing these technologies is an existential threat to other worlds. And this is why I turned the whole alien invasion thing on its head. I go, no, you got it backwards. Humans are the threat. Now, not the average man on the street, but people possessing these kind of technologies with malice in their hearts, and who weaponize them, and who are targeting ET assets, not just around the Earth, but out in space. So this is where the whole world has a security threat that the United Nations and governments around the world are not yet talking about. It's clandestine. It's very serious. And now the good news is that there are very powerful people in elite special forces and certain agencies in the United States that understand this a lot better than the members of Congress and the White House, and they're moving to fix it. So that's another
Is that like
whole
a
initiative.
coup? What are we talking about?
I can't go too far into it. I will just simply say that I've been advising them on if they get the authorization, they will be able to roll on all of these corporate and government black sites and seize them and take them back under control. Yes, that is the plan. But that is, in a way, that's the worst case scenario. A better scenario is that this thing unwinds by people defecting from inside those illegal projects, which is another whole initiative. There's a whole team of people cooperating with me right now. And they help with my security as well now. I mean, they're very good men, and they have the assets, right? I mean, they're killers. But if I go certain places, they pick me up in armored vehicles and all that sort of thing. People probably saw me at LA Live in July for the premiere of The Lost Century arrive in this armored thing. That was that group providing protection for me. So they're great people, but there are a whole bunch of those guys who are so fed up with where the world's headed, because we know we're headed for a crash, that they're planning to do something they call catastrophic disclosure, where they would unilaterally dump into the public domain stuff like you've never seen that I know about. Now, that's a separate initiative from this law enforcement strike team that I'm advising. So there are these two big initiatives that I'm involved with that have nothing to do with Congress or the White House. So
there are a few key areas or directions I want to go in this, but I guess first is I used it in another show recently, but it's a line of Star Trek: resistance is futile. Is it inevitable that the truth is going to come out? It sounds like there are so many different directions and so many different avenues and so many different plan Bs that you have in place and that other great people have in place. The truth is going to come out. We are going to, I almost want to say, enter an age of grace after we get through this time period.
Yes, but it could be a bloody mess if it's handled improperly. Now, let me comment on that. Back in 1999, you'll see in the archive an assessment I wrote called When Disclosure Serves Secrecy. So there are two disclosures, one that is truthful and hopeful, and one that presents this as an alien invasion week on the History Channel, where it's presented falsely and manipulates the world into obeying and bowing down in front of this false god of security by people who are manipulative. So I think here's the big problem. And I'll be very blunt about this. When Unacknowledged, this documentary many of your friends may have seen, hit about 780 million viewers globally. They unleashed a master counterintelligence disinformation agent named Luis Elizondo. And I was alerted about this by a senior CIA guy who's been supportive for 30 years, who's in the shadows. And he then, when this young man named David Grush, I had dealt with him when he was undercover. When he came forward, he ended up being pulled into the lap of Colonel Alexander and Luis Elizondo, and he provided factual information, but then he started being fed false information. And he's very new and young to this, and he then became a purveyor of disinformation, unwittingly, I believe. I mean, he may in fact believe it. So I think one of the problems is it's very easy to what's called capture. It's like when big oil funds environmental research at universities, right? And captures the environmental research to spin it in their direction. There's this phenomenon known as capture in the intelligence community. And so if this continues to happen, one of the problems is if people are gullible and they're not discerning, they're not going to know whether the person is telling one part truth and 10 parts fiction or all truth. And this is another reason for this archive. It's the truth and the whole truth. And so if people master that information, they'll have a mental guide as to whether something is true or not. But, basically knowledge, it says in the Vedas, the Sanskrit, knowledge is the greatest purifier. So having the knowledge purifies and clarifies things. Information isn't knowledge, and knowledge isn't wisdom. So we need to get the information mastered. That's for this Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive. But then we need the knowledge, and then we need the wisdom, how to go forward. So the disclosure of this subject could go a number of ways. And one way that I'm very concerned it will be directed by these corrupt interests covertly is in the direction of an alien threat. As Werner von Braun, who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, warned on his deathbed, he said this would be the long-term plan. He said this in 1974, again, 50 years ago, and that the plan would be to present this as an alien threat to falsely unite the world around a military junta instead of around peace. And on his deathbed, he so regretted it, told my friend Carol Rosin about this, and told her she had to work her entire life to prevent weapons in space and to expose this fraud.
So this gets to a couple things that you were just talking about a minute ago. First off, you said it's not just the weapons on Earth, but the weapons in space. And so I'm wondering if we have craft that are going out there. I mean, if they're traveling faster than the speed of light, we can go pretty far distances at this point. I don't think there is such a thing as distance anymore. And we can be an existential threat out there.
We are, but I don't think, now there's a lot of mythology around this, and people call it the secret space program, and there is a secret space program, but it gets embellished. Now, my understanding is we have gone out through our solar system, but we are not allowed to go further, and we've had our wings clipped. Now, look, there is a cosmic order. A savage and violent civilization like Homo sapiens, primates really, 98% chimpanzees, we are, that organize into troops and murder each other, as you know, monkeys do. So monkeys, the descendants of monkeys, humans, even though we have this other divine aspect, have this, let's call it the original sin of violence that dolphins don't have. Even wolves don't kill each other. They'll defend their pack. So humans have this innate, and not all civilizations do. And so there are worlds out there, believe it or not, that don't even have a word or concept of war and conflict ever. And yet humans have thrived on it. So one of the problems is that my understanding is that when we begin to push too far out there, we get stopped and thrown back like a bad penny. Which further enrages these people who have such power that they think they should be able to do anything they damn well please. Because I call these people the masters of the universe who, have arrogated to themselves this. But there's an order ahead of and above them. Not only, in my opinion, a divine order, but there's a cosmic physical order. So I don't think we've been able to do that. But now let me make a distinction between that, physically in a spacecraft going out to another star system, and a weapon system that goes through the entangled non-locality of physics that could hit, right? So you could deploy that weapon from a satellite or from Earth, and it could reach another star system.
Like what's you have in your documentary, I believe, what's in Antarctica, for instance.
Yes. That huge array that's down there at the South Pole, actually, that we have a witness who worked for Raytheon that built it. And it's a neutrino light array. And it's both a tracking, but also a weapon system. And these systems, when you begin to get your mind around the quantum entanglement concept, which means that every point in space and time is immediately connected to each other at that quantum entangled level. Well, if you create a weapon system that operates at that level, you don't need to send a crew of people and a spacecraft out. You can just target out there. So this is another big problem, is that who's minding that store? And I want to point out to people what I just described a few moments ago about me flying over this site with these massive electromagnetic pulse weapons, which I have photos and videos of. That is against the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. EMP weapons are part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty of Nuclear Weapons, and those have been banned globally. But there they are, and I can prove it, and I have people who have operated them. And worse, they're not only stationary, they can be put on Humvees, and they can be put on aircraft and ships. So I also know down along the coast of Eglin Air Force Base, there was an array of these where they would hit objects that were ET over the Gulf of Mexico, and they would just drop like a rock, and then they go retrieve them. So, and I have a colonel, Air Force, who has briefed me on that system. So I think we have to begin to look at this and go, until, what are we going to do to get this out of control, dangerous group under control? Well, the Congress is moving at the speed of molasses in Canada in the winter, and the White House is totally clueless, frankly, on this issue right now, and knows nothing about it. But one of the issues that's very good, a big breakthrough, is that there are both insiders in that covert clandestine UFO world and the special forces and law enforcement people pivoting towards doing something about it under the rule of law, on using the law to do so. So how that plays out, I don't know. We don't want a black on black war in the continental United States and Canada. So I'm trying to resolve this peacefully by encouraging folks. And by the way, the people in this law enforcement effort, I have introduced them to the leader of the defection group who are in these illegal covert programs, and they've had a handshake and they know each other. I set that meeting up late last year before I got almost killed. I was injured in a terrible accident. So that is going forward. How it plays out, I don't know, obviously. I mean, this is a David and Goliath story for certain, but eventually David did slay Goliath. But, that's where we're moving towards.
I want to talk about the last 10 minutes, how people can help, what people can do. But before we do that, the last thing that I have is there's this well-intentioned, I believe, individuals who will say that ET technology doesn't necessarily mean that a civilization is more peaceful, or that a civilization has found harmony, or that a civilization may not be dangerous. Can you speak to that?
Well, I mean, you can't prove a negative, but there's no evidence that those civilizations are malevolent or hostile, or they would have shut us down. I mean, look, when all this broke forward in the 40s and 1945, they could see, because they have the ability remote view into the future, where we were headed. If they had wanted to just shut it down, they could have, in a fraction of a second, shut down every high-tech system on the planet at that point, and they still could. So my point is that they're hoping we evolve spiritually and socially beyond the consciousness of destruction. And to that point, we're having this massive event that all of you should come to in California, in Temecula, California. So we only can have 500 people on the site, but it's going to be a whole 3-day weekend of going into all of this, but also going into the ability to do CE5 contact and make contact. And we're going to do a mass contact event out under the stars. And if you can't be there in person, you can be there virtually. We're going to have a webinar link. And I hope you and other folks can come. It's going to be really exciting. I think we can take 500 people. I think there are 400 people already signed up. But so there's still about 100 spots. It's 2 months from now. And then we're also going to do it virtually, but it's going to be so much fun because during the day, we're going to unpack all of this about the disclosure efforts, as well as we're going to have Lori Williams there helping me train people with remote viewing. So there'll be a remote viewing class. Then we're going to go out at night under the stars and make CE5 contact. And people should get the CE5 contact app to practice beforehand. And then we're going to do mass contact. Saturday and Sunday night, we're going to have thousands of people online, as well as the 500 people there going into higher consciousness and making contact with the ETs and inviting them to come to Earth in peace.
How do we protect the ETs during this?
Yes. Well, if you look at the protocol, if you get the app, the CE5 contact app, in the meditation.
And we'll have the links for everything here.
Oh, great. It clearly says we invite them to appear in any way that is safe and appropriate for this time and place. In other words, I am acutely aware that the Earth is an armed camp, and more than anyone who's not an operator of those systems, I know how they work and how dangerous they are. So one of the things I've put into these protocols since I started the project in 1990, 34 years ago, was that we invite them to appear and we ask that they be aware of the risk assessment, and then they appear in whatever form and way and for how long it's safe for them. Because this is a dangerous planet still. But I think if we all come together in higher consciousness, one of the things we did with Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, that documentary, is teach people that when enough people are meditating in a higher consciousness together, it shifts people who don't even know you're doing it. It raises the frequency of the whole conscious field of humanity. And that is really the power that people, with all this other material, it can be very frustrating. You feel very helpless. But this is empowering. This is something everyone can do in your backyard and with your friends. And even if you don't see something, it's not about that. The process of doing it creates this morphogenic field, like Rupert Sheldrake talks about, that shifts everything into a positive direction for the future. So that's why we're doing this mass contact event in July in California, in Temecula.
And it sounds important that people focus on this, people look into this at the end of the show, because you could be going, it's them, it's their fault, which puts you in a victim role, versus being able to broadcast out into the future and within what it is you do wish to see coming out of this.
Yes, and I think we, the good people of the Earth, need to take charge of the future of the planet and not sit on our hands and act like passive victims, letting a bunch of goose-stepping fascists run it into the ground. I'm being very blunt. But passivity is our enemy. Not doing things is how Adolf Hitler came to power. People let him come to power. So you have to be a bit of an activist. So I'm a disclosure activist, but I'm also a universal peace activist for making contact with these civilizations. And I think ultimately, that is where the center of power and gravity of the future is with the people doing this together.
Thank you. What are other ways that people can be an activist, let us say, and then where can people go to find this amazing archive and to find out everything more that they can do?
Yes, well, you'll see the links. It's the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive. And we have a crowdfunding site we just launched a couple weeks ago. We have a goal of $1 million. And I think we're at almost 70,000, but we've just launched it. And our goal is to be able to keep, if we get enough contributions, we'll be able to keep the website open and free without having to put a monthly fee on it, which I don't want to do, or ads. I hate the idea of pop-up ads in something this important. So we're trying to keep it without ads and without a charge. So the only way we can do that is people contributing. I don't care if it's $1 or $10,000. Just if you can help us, it will help us keep it open to everybody on Earth.
And are there other things that we can do? In addition, I want everybody to do this. And on top of that,
well, spread the word about this archive. In other words, on your social media and your friends and emails, we'll put this link out to the crowdfunding and also to the archive itself. And also to the event in Temecula, those three things. Because the more we get mass participation from the public, the more we end up being able to change the direction we're going, which is dangerous, into a bright future that's sustainable. And I think it needs everyone to do this sort of grassroots work. And the other thing everyone can do is educate themselves, get into the archive, spend some time. You can surf through it. It's word searchable. We spent a lot of money making it searchable, and go in there and discover the things that you find interesting. There's a lot of eye candy. Some of it's tedious and very academic, but some of it's really fun to look at, and just enjoy it and get educated. And then the other thing everyone can do, get the CE5 Contact app, and with 1 or 2 or 3 people, practice doing that and letting the ETs know that not everyone on Earth is trying to kill them. And not everyone on Earth is either apathetic or violent, that there are good people willing to extend a hand of peace out to the universe.
Last question, then we got to let you go. You have talked before about being on a mission to get free energy to the world. Can you share with us anything that you can actually safely share with us at this point?
Yeah, one of the most astounding things in the archive is the CIA Sajaki files. So there was a man named John Bedini who was given access for 24 hours to all the secret patents and files, to Xerox as many as he could when they were trying to recruit him into the CIA programs. And that entire dossier of patents are in there for anyone to read. And that we are disclosing fully and openly on the archive. Is probably the most explosive thing in the archive.
Without words. Without words.
The whole thing is in there. All of it. So yeah, I mean, when people realize what's in this archive, they're going to go, it's going to be OMG. It's going to be, wow, really? So yeah, there it is.
Thank you. I'm without words. I will wrap this up. We need to let you go. This has been brilliant, amazing. I love the work you're doing.
Keep it up.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stephen Greer.
Appreciate it.
So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, dive into the archives today with everything you've got, and then project a brilliant, positive new future. And yes, get the CE5 app so that you can let everybody know up there, which is really in here, that we are coming out of a place of love and that there are safe, beautiful humans. And above and beyond all else, shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I appreciate your help getting the word out.
I am without words. I'm without words. I am totally without words. Flummoxed, flabbergasted. It's interesting. Let me put a few of the pieces together in my head here. I'm someone that believes very strongly that the answers come from the inside. I'm someone who believes that we project in our outer reality what we feel and think in the inside, in our inner reality, which is why I don't want this to be a fear-based show, or didn't want this to be a fear-based show. On the other hand, it's important to know if a car is about to drive over your foot so that you can step aside and not have the car drive over your foot. And if it is parked on your foot, so that you can gently, quickly help somebody to get the car off of your foot. So it's very interesting how we balance these two things, and how Dr. Stephen Greer is going through this, because we don't want to play in the side of fear. We want to play in the side of love. And at the same time, it's called spiritual activism. We get to step forward, each of us in our own way. So I found this fascinating. I found this brilliant. I found this a roadmap of beyond the whole ET world. But if you go, Michael, you're a spiritual show, why are you having a show on ETs? Because this has been held from us. This has been kept from us, that we are part of a galactic community, that we are members of the universe. We are not just these tiny little humans on this tiny blue dot. We matter so much more than that. And we are being welcomed into this community, and to be able to step in our true power if we recognize who and what we are. And so to me, the most spiritual thing in the world is recognizing that we are not only human, and that we are not alone in this world. On that note, yes, dive into the archives with everything you've got. Also, get the dailywoohoo.com. Go to dailywoohoo.com and get a daily dose of vibrational goodness. What does this have to do with ETs? Everything. For as your energy goes up, you project your new reality. As your energy goes up, the negative energies cannot affect you, and you literally become the creator that you are meant to be. So I have a daily attunement that comes out to you. It's at dailywoohoo.com. It's totally free. Each and every day, I share my journey. I share what's going on here. I share the big picture stuff. I share coming out of my automatic writing, and I help bring your vibration up, 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 way up on a daily basis. It's dailywoohoo.com. If you want to take your spiritual journey to a whole nother level and vibrate at that higher state, we'll call it at the level of civilization 1.0, maybe even higher than that, come become the mystic you were always meant to be. We meet live 4 Wednesdays each and every month, or you can come and catch the recordings. We do clearings, we do attunements, we do exercises to bring your energy up and literally shift your consciousness, or even you could say realign your DNA to a higher level of potentiality. Link is down below. That is for the School of Mystics. And if you want to communicate with the other side of the veil, what am I talking about? Angels, guides, inner wisdom, whatever you want to call it. And literally like CE5, if you want to communicate with higher dimensional beings, I have a class and a program that can teach you how to do just that. It's automatic writing, and you can go to the link down below, automaticwriting.com, get access to the program beginning today, and you get a live class with me each and every month. That's automaticwriting.com. So here's a link to the next amazing show. Love you so, so much. Keep on shining bright. Woohoo! I feel bright about the future. I feel positive about the future. And how does it get any better than this? Lots of love, everyone.
Shine bright.